Welcome to this serene escape, where the world slows down and all that's left is you and the gentle hush of the night. Let's take a moment to settle in, to let the breaths grow deep and the mind grow quiet. Find a spot where you can rest comfortably, whether it's under a blanket, on a soft cushion, or even sitting quietly in the stillness of your space. Take a breath in slow and full, and exhale, long and steady. With each exhale, imagine any tension melting away, like mist evaporating in the morning sun. Allow your eyes to close if they wish, and feel the weight of your body supported, grounded, and safe. Now picture a peaceful meadow at twilight. The sky is a gentle blend of soft pinks and blues, with stars beginning to twinkle like distant friends. A light breeze carries the scent of wildflowers and fresh grass, while the sound of a gentle stream hums in the distance. With each breath you take, feel the calm of this place settle into you, as though the earth itself is embracing you. Here, in this quiet meadow, there is nothing to do, nowhere to go, just the present moment, the breath, and the deep, unshakable sense of peace. Let go of any thoughts, any worries, and simply be. Allow yourself to drift into this stillness, this calm, as the world around you fades softly into the background. And as you rest here, you're invited to join me in a story, a gentle journey through a quiet forest, where the trees whisper softly and the moonlight guides the way. But first, let's simply stay here in this stillness and let the peace settle in, one breath at a time. The room was bathed in the golden glow of candlelight, the flickering flames casting shadows that danced gently across the walls. The air was filled with the comforting scent of beeswax and the faint, earthy aroma of a pine log burning low in the hearth. A kettle hummed softly on the stovetop, its melody intertwining with the crackle of the fire as it warmed the small cottage with a cozy embrace. The world outside seemed to have paused, as if the evening itself had taken a breath and held it, leaving everything still and quiet. She moved through the space with the grace of someone who had performed this ritual 1,000 times. Each step was deliberate but unhurried, as though time itself had no hold here. She reached for a ceramic teapot on the shelf, its surface adorned with delicate patterns of wildflowers, and placed it on the sill of the window. The glass panes reflected the soft glow of the candles, casting a golden sheen over the simple act of preparing tea. Outside, the first stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, their light faint but steadfast. As the kettle came to a boil, she lifted it with a habitual ease and poured steaming water over the loose leaves in the pot. The scent of chamomile and lemon balm filled the air, warm and inviting, as the steam curled upward and kissed the cool glass of the window. She leaned in for a moment, her breath leaving a faint mist on the pane, and traced a small circle in it with her finger. A simple, childlike gesture that brought a quiet smile to her face. The world outside seemed to blur for a moment, as though the universe was dissolving into the simplicity of this quiet act. The cat, a soft bundle of graying fur with eyes like emeralds, stirred from its nap on the cushion by the fire. It stretched languidly, arching its back and extending its claws before padding silently across the floor to where she stood. She reached down to stroke its head, her fingers gentle as she felt the warmth of its body beneath her touch. The cat purred, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate through the air, adding another layer to the symphony of evening sounds. It nuzzled her hand, then, seemingly content, settled at her feet, its presence a reminder of the small, unassuming joys that filled the quiet moments of life. As the tea steeped, she wandered to the back of the cottage, her slippered feet making barely a sound on the worn wooden floorboards. The door to the garden was ajar, just enough to allow the night air to slip in, carrying with it the fragrance of damp earth and the faint sweetness of blooming lavender. She pushed it open and stepped outside, wrapping her arms around herself against the coolness of the evening. The sky was now a deep shade of indigo, dotted with stars that seemed to brighten as she stood there, their light magnified by the stillness of the night. The garden was bathed in the soft glow of moonlight, the shadows of the plants elongated and graceful. She walked slowly along the narrow stone path, her feet crunching on the gravel, the sound crisp and grounding. A small fountain bubbled softly in the corner, its water flowing into a shallow basin with a sound like a quiet laugh. She paused beside it, dipping her fingers into the cool water and watching as it rippled outward, disturbing the reflection of the stars above. The world felt vast and small all at once, as though the infinite expanse of the universe had condensed into this single, perfect moment. After a few moments, she returned inside, the chill of the evening air replaced by the warmth of the fire. The tea had finished steeping, and she poured a cup, the amber liquid glowing in the candlelight. She added a spoonful of honey, its golden sweetness dissolving with a slight swirl of her spoon. The first sip was like a hug, warm and comforting, the flavors of the herbs melding together in a way that felt both soothing and familiar. She settled into her armchair by the fire, the cushions soft and worn from years of use. The cat joined her, curling up in her lap with a contented sigh. She ran her fingers through its fur, the texture smooth and comforting. As the warmth of the tea seeped into her hands, the fire crackled and popped, sending small sparks upward into the chimney, each one a fleeting, golden moment of light. The room seemed to grow quieter, as though the very act of sitting still had somehow deepened the silence. The world outside continued its slow, unremarkable dance. The stars shone, the wind whispered through the trees, the distant hoot of an owl broke the stillness. But inside, all was calm. Time itself seemed to bend, stretching out into long, lazy moments that were both timeless and enduring. As the last of the tea was sipped, she set the cup aside and closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fire and the weight of the cat lull her into a state of deep relaxation. The world seemed to slow even further, as though the very act of breathing had become a meditation. The present moment was all there was. was, and it was enough. And as she sat there, surrounded by the quiet beauty of her little cottage, the night deepened, wrapping the world in a soft, dark blanket. The stars continued to twinkle, the fire continued to burn, and the cat continued to sleep, its rhythmic breathing a steady reminder of the peace that filled the room. It was as though the universe itself had conspired to create this perfect, timeless moment, one that could be returned to again and again, whenever the world outside grew too loud or too fast. In this quiet, there was no need for words or explanations, no need for doing or striving. There was only the simplicity of being, the deep, unshakable sense of peace that came from slowing down and letting the world unhurriedly unfold. And in this space, as the night wore on and the stars shone brighter, it became clear that sometimes the most profound moments of life are the ones we allow ourselves to savor, the ones we give ourselves permission to simply be. As the embers of the fire settled lower, she felt a warmth spread through her, like the gentle hum of a lullaby. The room seemed to grow softer, the shadows deepening in a way that felt comforting rather than imposing. The cat, now fully asleep, breathed steadily in her lap, its presence a reminder of the simple, unassuming beauty of connection. She ran her fingers through its fur once more, the texture grounding her in the present moment. Her mind began to wander, not in a restless way, but with the ease of a leaf floating on a still pond. She thought about the day that had passed, the quiet moments that had filled it. She remembered the morning, when the sun had risen slowly, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose. She had stood at the edge of her garden, breathing in the dewy air, feeling the earth awaken beneath her feet. The soil had been cool and damp, and she had spent a while tending to her herbs, her hands sinking into the richness of the ground. Each plant had seemed to greet her, their leaves unfurling like tiny flags waving in the morning breeze. She had smiled to herself, feeling the connection to the land, to the cycle of growth and rest that governed her days. She recalled the sound of birdsong that morning, the way the sparrows had flitted between the branches of the apple tree, their chirping a lively accompaniment to her work. She had left a small dish of seeds on the windowsill, and as she worked, she had watched them come and go, their tiny forms darting in and out of view. The simplicity of that moment had brought her such joy, a quiet contentment that had stayed with her throughout the day. Later, she had walked into the village, her basket slung over her arm. The air had been crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. She had exchanged pleasantries with the baker, whose kindness always felt like a warm hug. He had offered her a fresh loaf, still fragrant from the oven, and she had accepted with a smile. Their conversation had been brief but meaningful, a reminder of the small but profound connections that wove her life together. She had also stopped by the apothecary, where the scent of dried herbs and spices had filled the air, transporting her to a place of comfort and familiarity. The proprietor had shown her a new shipment of chamomile, its delicate flowers like tiny stars in in the dim light of the shop, she had purchased a small handful, knowing it would add a soothing touch to her evening tea. As she sat now by the fire, the memory of the day's small pleasures felt like a patchwork quilt spread across her mind. Each moment, however fleeting, had been a thread in the tapestry of her life, weaving together to create a sense of fullness and gratitude. There was no need for grand gestures or dramatic events. The quiet, unassuming moments had been enough. They had filled her with a sense of peace, a reminder that beauty was not always loud or showy, but often found in the stillness, the pause between breaths. She thought, too, about the silence of the late afternoon when she had sat by the window and watched the light change. The sun had hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the garden. A rabbit had hopped into view, its fur fluffed against the chill, and she had watched it nibble on a patch of clover, its movements slow and deliberate. The world had seemed to hold its breath, as though the very act of living was enough. In that moment, she had felt a deep sense of harmony, as though she were a part of something much larger than herself, a symphony of life that played on endlessly, note by note. As the fire continued to burn, the room grew quieter still. The cat stirred once, shifted its position, and settled back into sleep, its presence a source of comfort. She felt the weight of her body in the chair, the softness of the cushion beneath her, the warmth of the quilt draped over her shoulders. Her breath came and went, slow and steady, like the rise and fall of the ocean tide. The world outside seemed to fade further away, until there was only the present moment, the gentle crackle of the fire, and the quiet hum of her own heartbeat. In this stillness, she felt a sense of gratitude, not for anything grand or extraordinary, but for the small, everyday moments that had filled her life. For the garden, the herbs, the kindness of the baker, the scent of the earth, the song of the birds, the warmth of the fire, and the softness of the cat in her lap. Each of these had been a gift, a reminder of the beauty that could be found in simplicity, in the pause between breaths, in the quiet moments that made up the fabric of her days. As she sat there, the world outside seemed to slow even further, until time itself felt like a gentle stream, flowing smoothly and without urgency. The stars twinkled in the sky. The moon cast its silvery light over the garden, and the night deepened, wrapping everything in its embrace. The fire burned low, its light flickering softly, and the room grew darker. But there was no sense of loss or emptiness. Instead, there was a fullness, a sense of completion, as though the day had been exactly as it was meant to be. In this quiet, she felt her own body begin to relax more deeply, her muscles softening, her mind growing calm. The weight of her eyelids became noticeable, and she allowed them to close, letting the warmth of the moment wash over her. The world seemed to narrow to a single point, the present moment, and within it, there was nothing but peace. The cat's gentle breathing, the occasional pop of the fire, the faint scent of chamomile in the air, each of these became a thread in the tapestry of her relaxation, weaving together to create a sense of safety and calm. And as the night wore on, the shone brighter, the world grew quieter, and she found herself drifting into a place of deep rest, a place where the small, gentle moments of the day could be carried with her, like a soft light guiding her through the darkness. The last thing she felt was the warmth of the room, the weight of her body in the chair, and the deep, unshakable sense of peace that came from slowing down, from pausing, from being. As the embers settled deeper into the hearth, their glow softening into a warm, russet light, she felt the weight of her eyelids growing heavier, as though pulled down by the gentle tides of the night. The air in the room seemed to thicken with stillness, and the scent of chamomile lingered faintly, a reminder of the tea she had savored earlier. The cat, now a serene bundle of fur in her lap, stirred once more, its tail twitching slightly before it settled back into the quiet rhythm of sleep. She smiled to herself, the movement barely perceptible, her body and mind slipping further into the embrace of relaxation. Her thoughts drifted outward, carried by the quiet hum of the night, and she found herself reflecting on the cycle of the day, the way it had unfolded with such simplicity and grace. She thought about the morning light, the way the sun had touched the dewdrops on the garden leaves, painting them like tiny jewels scattered across the earth. She remembered the way the light had changed as the day wore on, soft and golden in the afternoon, then deepening into the rich hues of twilight. Now, in the darkness of the evening, the stars shone their brightest, their light a gentle reminder of the vast and mysterious world beyond her small cottage. She considered, too, the rhythm of the seasons, how each one brought its own quiet beauty, its own lessons. The spring had come with its burst of life, the earth awakening from its slumber, the air filled with the scent of blossoms and fresh greenery. Summer had brought warmth and vibrancy, the days stretching long and languid, the garden in full bloom. Autumn had painted the world in shades of gold and amber, its crisp air carrying the scent of decaying leaves and ripe fruit, and winter had brought stillness, the earth resting under a blanket of snow, the nights long and quiet, the stars shining brightly in the dark sky. In each season, she had found moments of beauty, moments of peace. She had learned to bend with the changes, to adapt to the rhythm of the natural world. And in doing so, she had come to understand the value of resilience, the quiet strength required to weather the storms, to embrace the cold and the darkness, knowing that they, too, were part of the cycle. She had learned to find comfort in the stillness, to recognize that even in the quietest moments, there was life, there was growth, there was beauty. As she sat there, the weight of her body sinking deeper into the chair, she felt a sense of harmony with the world around her. The fire crackled softly, its light flickering across the walls in a slow, steady dance. The cat's breathing grew deeper, its presence a reminder of the simple, unassuming connections that filled her life. Outside, the night deepened, the stars shining with a quiet intensity, their light filtering through the windows and casting a soft glow over the room. She thought, too, about the quiet moments she had shared with the natural world that day, the way the breeze had carried the scent of lavender, the way the light had filtered through the leaves of the apple tree, casting dappled shadows on the ground. She had paused by the tree, running her hand over the rough bark, feeling the solidity of it, the way it seemed to pulse with life. She had stood there for a moment, her feet rooted to the earth, her breath slow and steady. And in that moment, she had felt a deep sense of connection, a sense of belonging to the land, to the cycle of life. The memory brought a soft smile to her lips, and she felt her body relax even further, her muscles softening, her mind growing quiet. The world outside seemed to fade away, until there was only the present moment, the gentle hum of the night, and the deep, unshakable sense of peace that had settled into her bones as the last of the embers burned low, their light dimming into a soft, golden glow. She felt herself becoming one with the stillness. The room seemed to expand, the walls receding, and she felt the vastness of the night stretching out before her. And yet, in that vastness, she felt a sense of safety, a sense of being held by the world itself. The stars shone brightly, their light a gentle reminder of the infinite possibilities that lay beyond her small cottage, beyond the quiet moments of her life. But for now, in this moment, there was no need to reach for anything beyond. The simplicity of the present, the quiet beauty of the world around her, was enough. She had learned to find joy in the stillness, to recognize that the most profound moments of life were often the ones that passed without fanfare, without noise. They were the moments of quiet connection, of simple beauty, of deep peace. And as the night wore on, the stars continued to shine, the world continued to turn, and she found herself drifting into a place of deep rest, a place where the gentle hum of the universe was the only sound that mattered. The last thing she felt was the warmth of the room, the weight of her body in the chair, and the deep, unshakable sense of peace that came from slowing down, from pausing, from being, as the last embers of the fire glowed softly, casting a warm, golden light across the room. She gently rose from her armchair, the softness of the cushions relinquishing her with a quiet sigh. The cat, now awake and stretching, followed closely behind, its tail fluttering like a banner of comfort. The air was filled with the lingering scent of chamomile, a soothing reminder of the tea she had savored earlier, and the earthy aroma from the garden lingering faintly in the breeze. Her bedroom, a sanctuary of rest, welcomed her with open arms. The quilt, a patchwork of warm colors and textures, lay invitingly across the bed, its weight promising comfort and security. She slipped under the covers, feeling the softness of the sheets envelop her like a gentle embrace. The quilt settled over her, its familiar weight a source of deep reassurance, as though the world itself had wrapped its arms around her. Beside her, the cat leaped onto the bed, its paws barely making a sound on the soft bedding. It nestled close, its fur a warm, comforting presence, and its breathing a steady metronome of calm. The room was bathed in the soft, silvery light of the moon, filtering through the window like a gentle whisper. Outside, The night sounds wove a lullaby of crickets, a distant hooting owl, and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. As she lay there, the mattress cradled her body, supporting her with a comforting firmness. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the present moment, the quiet of the night, and the deep, unshakable sense of peace that settled in her bones. Her mind, once active with the day's thoughts, grew quiet, letting go of worries and cares like autumn leaves drifting to the ground. Her body relaxed further, each muscle releasing its tension, sinking deeper into the bed. The warmth of the quilt seeped into her, chasing away any lingering chill, while the coolness of the sheets provided a refreshing contrast. The scent of lavender wafted gently from a sachet in the drawer, intertwining with the earthy aroma of the garden, creating a symphony of familiar and comforting smells. The cat shifted slightly, its gentle movement a reminder of the simple, unassuming joys of connection. Its breathing, slow and steady, synchronized with hers, blending into the rhythm of the night. Together, they were islands of calm in the vast, dark ocean of the world, yet deeply connected in this quiet moment. As she drifted closer to sleep, her thoughts grew distant, like clouds floating lazily across a summer sky. She recalled the day's moments of beauty, the golden light of the morning, the bloom of the garden, the kindness of the baker, the scent of the earth. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of her life, weaving together to create a sense of fullness and gratitude. Now, dear listener, imagine yourself in your own quiet sanctuary, surrounded by the comforts that bring you peace. Feel the softness of your bed, the warmth of your blankets, and the stillness of the night. Let the world outside recede, its noises fading into the distance as you sink deeper into relaxation. Allow your breath to slow, your mind to quiet, and your body to soften, letting go of all tension and worry. In this moment, there is no need for thought or action, only the deep, restful stillness of the night. You are safe, comforted, and at peace, surrounded by the gentle sounds of the world slowing down. Let your eyelids grow heavy, your consciousness drift, and your body relax, knowing that this moment is yours to savor. And as you rest, the stars continue to twinkle above, their light a gentle reminder of the vast and wondrous world around you. The night deepens, wrapping everything in its embrace, and you find yourself drifting into a place of deep rest, where the gentle hum of the universe is the only sound that matters. Sleep well, dear one, and may your dreams be as sweet as this quiet moment. Good night.